What's up guys, welcome back to another video, and in this tutorial we're going to be drawing Asta demon form from Black Clover. So we're going to begin this video with a perfect square, which is going to span 2 inches or 5 centimeters across on every side. For this one I'll be using regular drawing paper, so it'll be 12 inches tall and 9 inches wide. If you're using a different size paper, I recommend adjusting the size of your square accordingly. So we're going to start this one by drawing his right eye in the crosshairs of the cube, with the pupil almost at the intersection. His second eye will be drawn lower and off to the side from his first. I'm going to reshape his eyes by sketching along the outside until I get the length I want. Let's draw the crease between his eyes and then get to work on his mouth, which is going to stretch from one pupil to the other. I made his jawline a bit more defined than I should have here, so I'll round it off in a minute. Back to the mouth. We'll draw the near side of his mouth wider than the far side. Remember to keep the corners of his mouth as round as you can. His mouth should not be wider than his pupils. I'm actually going to redraw the side of his face, since it's actually rounder than I wanted it. His nose shouldn't take much work, it should go just above his mouth. Now we'll draw some extra details around his eyes and his eyebrows. His headband might be a bit tricky since it has an odd shape, so I'd recommend drawing it with a light touch. That'll make it easier to erase in case you mess up. We already have a lot of details on his face, so things will get a bit messy now that we're adding the hair, but don't worry. It'll look much cleaner once we go over it with a fine liner. I'm actually going to make a few minor changes to his eye, and then I'm going to completely redefine his left jawline. Much better. Now let's draw his left ear, and then continue drawing his hair. Let's add some details to his right ear, and then draw what appears to be a small rope around his neck. His chest muscles won't be very big, but that's because for this pose he's leaning in. Alright, so I was drawing for like 10 minutes before I realized I wasn't recording. Normally I just keep rolling, but I actually thought it might be important for you to see my process for this one, so I decided to run through it again. If I'm being honest, forgetting to hit record has been the bane of my existence since I started this YouTube channel. Okay, so first we're gonna draw the hair nearest his headband. Then we'll draw his horn, and lastly we'll draw some of the taller hairs. One of these hairs is actually a horn, but you won't be able to tell until we start coloring. Well, at least I think it's a horn. I actually haven't watched Black Clover yet, although it's definitely on my to-do list. Oh, there's some other details I forgot to record, but it's pretty straightforward, so you shouldn't have any trouble. It's just the shadow from his demon side creeping onto his face. Anyways, let's go ahead and get to work on his cape. We're gonna draw his left arm just underneath the headband. I had to make an adjustment here because his cape was a bit too big. Now let's draw his belt line. After we're finished with the belt, we're gonna continue to draw the side of his body until we reach his ear, which is where we are gonna start drawing his right arm. Okay, cool. So let's get to work on his torso and draw his abs. There's actually going to be a Harry Potter looking scar across the side of his torso. It might be a bit difficult to define because of all the other lines on his torso, but try to get the general shape and we'll make it much more clear once we go over it with a pen. Now we'll draw another symbol on the demon side of his chest, and then get to work on his lower body, starting with his belt. Now we're going to add some details to his belt. I'm gonna draw just the base of his wing next to his horn, and then go back to work on his lower body, this time drawing his bag. Okay, now let's draw the general shape of his wing before beginning work on his sword. For his sword, I highly recommend using a ruler or some sort of straight edge because it's gonna look way better. Sorry, I made a mistake on the camera angle, so you won't see me drawing the top of the sword, but I'll show you in a moment. We're gonna draw two lines through the sword, which is gonna continue to the sword handle. The shape of the sword handle is gonna be very nuanced, so pay close attention to how I'm defining the details. By sketching a thick line and then erasing the graphite until I get the exact shape that I want. This might look sloppy, but trust me, it helps a lot. Now we can finally get to work on his hand and the rest of his arm. First, we'll draw the general shape of his arm, and then we'll add the details. Drawing his hand shouldn't be a problem. We'll start with his thumb. Make sure that his fingers extend a good distance past his sword hilts, but don't make them so long that they get near his wrist. Okay, we're gonna add some more details to his arm, and this is really gonna make his demon side look sinister. So finally we're gonna add some details to his human side arm, which is gonna be way easier than all the work that we put into his demon side. I'm gonna draw the outline for the symbol on his cape, but I'm not actually gonna fill it in with details. To be honest, it looked way too difficult, so I put it off until the very end of the video. For the legs, I actually made them way too skinny, so let's fix that and also add some extra details. We're finally done drawing our character, but we still have some work to do. Let's go ahead and draw the book, which is gonna be in the lower right corner of the page. I actually forgot to add the details to his wing, so let's go ahead and do that now. Let's put the finishing touches on our sketch by drawing some random stones being tossed around from the aftermath of his attack. Okay, so once we are done with the penning process, we can start coloring. And we'll begin with E00 and going over his face with it. Be very careful when you're coloring around his eyes, his eyebrows, and especially his teeth, because it's going to be next to impossible to erase any mistakes you make with the Copic markers. On his chest, you're going to have a bit more leeway to make mistakes because it's going to be surrounded by darker colors. We're going to go over the demon side using C6. We're actually going to use the same color to go over his sword later on. When you're coloring around the corners and the edges of his arm and his wing, we're going to go over it just one time, because the more times you go over it, the more chance that you have to make a mistake. But for the larger areas that we're going to color, we'll go over it at least 3 times. That way the color becomes much more vibrant and rich, and we're not going to see any of the white from the paper. We'll use Y00 to color the symbol on his chest, as well as his belt buckle and the end of his belt. We'll also use this yellow, to go over the edges of his cape. Back to his arm, we're going to use a bright red, R24, to color the flames that are covering his bicep and his forearm. We'll use the same red to color his headband. For the entirety of the coloring process, we're only going to go over the sketch with one Copic marker. And then we're going to add layers on top of that color with color pencils. So that's how we're going to add the details in the color. So I'm going to find a dark red, and we're going to go over the flames on his arm. Now we're going to find a dark gray color pencil and start coloring over the gray that we used to color his arm. It has to be dark enough, obviously, for you to see it and for you to be able to distinguish between the shadows and the first layer of the color that we went over with the marker. But it's not going to be black, so just try to find a dark gray. Sorry if it looks like I'm all over the place here. I promise you're not missing anything important. It's just me making mistakes. But back to the drawing, we're going to use E31 to color his belt, his bag, and also his shoes. We'll color his demon eye with the same red marker we've been using. And I actually forgot to color this shadow here, so be super careful. I got a little bit of gray there on his eye, but hopefully you won't notice that once I zoom out. Anyways, go over the gray again with the color pencil to give it a nice dark finish. And we'll repeat that process on his wing. Now let's go over his demon side with that gray color pencil just lightly, and we're going to do this just to add some depth and to add some texture to his arm and his wing. I'm going to use my N7 Copic marker to go over the demon side of his hair. Now let's go over the human side of his hair using a C0 Copic marker. I'm going to go over his skin with an E00 one more time because I can still see some patches of white on the paper. Great, now I'm going to shade over his skin with a color pencil. Make sure it's dark enough to provide some contrast between the two colors. Oh, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but make sure you give your ink a chance to dry before you start going over it with Copic markers. We have so many lines so close together on his abs and especially on his face. Unless you give it at least a few, I don't know exactly what the required time to dry is, but I found if you do it 5 minutes later, it's still gonna smear. So I've gotten in the habit of waiting a whole day and there's no smearing at all. So just something to think about. So now let's go ahead and use our C4 marker to color his legs. Sorry, I accidentally cut out the video below his belt, but you weren't really missing much there anyways. Notice that I'm turning the page a lot more now, and I wasn't turning it at all during the sketching process. That's because when you're using a pencil, you're allowed to use mistakes. But when you're using a marker or color pencils, you need to really make sure you get it perfectly the first time. Moving the page allows your wrist to move around more freely and allows you to create more accurate art. After you're done coloring with the Copic gray, go ahead and find an appropriate gray in your color pencil kit and go over it one more time with that. We're going to use our C4 Copic marker again, this time to color his sword handle. I forgot to color a portion of his leg, so I'll go ahead and do that now. So guys, I accidentally forgot to record for the first shade of brown that I went over on his belts and his bag and his shoes, so sorry about that. But I'm actually going to go over the same layer again with a darker brown because I didn't feel there was enough contrast. And then for the third layer, I'm going to use still a darker brown, but still has a hint of orange in it. It's not going to be a pure brown color. Now let's go ahead and color his actual sword using C6. I don't think I need to tell you, but be very careful. It's a dark color, and if you make a mistake with this one, there's no coming back from it. So take your time around the edges, and then you can hurry it up a little bit once you get to the center. We'll use C4 to shade over his shirt sleeve on his human side, and then shade over it with a dark gray color pencil. Let's go ahead and shade over his horn and his headgear using N1. And we're going to color his cape with N3. We'll pull out our lightest red, R20, to color his tongue. I forgot to color his horn with N1 earlier, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Now let's use this grayish silver color pencil to shade over his human side hair. Now we'll use the same silver to color over his horn and his headgear, and use a darker layer of shade to color on top of that. And we'll add some shadows under his horn and under his hair. Now we'll use the same dark gray to shade over his cape. Alright, now it's time to color the book. I had no real plan here, so I just threw some things out there and hoped for the best. First, I went over it with a dark red pastel. Then I used this reddish purple color pencil that I have in order to give some shape and form around the edges of the book. I also used my color pencil to provide a second layer of shade over the red of the pastel. We use our black color pencil to shade over his demon side hair. Don't worry too much if you mess up here, because if you kind of go outside the boundaries with the black color pencil, we can always just use our our ink fine liner to go over the edges and fix any mistakes that we've made. Okay, so I'm gonna grab my brown color pencil and we're gonna create a third layer of shade over his skin. So we're gonna go very lightly at first. I'm gonna define a little bit more around the edges, but generally very light touch. And actually go ahead and use your brown to go over the previous shade of color pencil again to give that a bit more definition as well. I have this sort of orangish brown color pencil that I'm going to use to go over his scar and help it stand out more. Now go ahead and grab your gold color pencil to shade over the darker areas of the yellow. Alright guys, it's finally time to color the rocks. So I'm going to have 3 shades of brown here. The first 2 shades are going to be more of a yellowish brown, and then the darkest shade is going to be a straight brown. Try to go over as many layers as you can because there's no Copic marker underneath, so there's gonna be some patches of white. For the smaller rocks, we only need to use the lightest and the darkest shade. And now for the rest of the rocks, we'll go back to using our 3 shade protocol. We're going to go ahead and redefine some of these lines with our 01 fine liner. And then we'll get to work on coloring our final rock. Okay, so let's use our silver color pencil to create a blade on the edge of a sword. We'll go over from one side to the other and then color it in. I'm also going to use the silver color pencil to create some highlights on the sword handle. Okay, one final thing with the sword, we're going to go ahead and add in that second layer of shade that I forgot to do earlier. First, we're going to define the borders and the outline of the shape. And I'm actually going to use a ruler to go from one end of the sword here to the other because it's going to be a sloped angle. And now all we've got to do is color it in with the same dark gray that we've been using this whole time. Just some extra details I forgot to add here with the black color pencil. And I'm actually going to shade over the darkest portion of his leg one more time, very lightly with the black color pencil. Now we're going to use this light brown, kind of goldish color pencil to go over the symbol on his headgear, and I'm actually going to take the same pencil and go over the entire headgear with it very lightly, just to kind of add an extra touch on top to help distinguish it from all the other grays around it. Alright, I've been trying to hold this out for as long as I could, but now I have no choice. So for the symbol, we're going to start with an outline using a pencil, and we're going to sketch a little picture of a bull, or an outline of a bull in the middle. And you can follow my process if you like, or you can go about it however you want, but just draw that bull in there, and then we're going to go over it with a pen. So this is actually kind of where it all starts going downhill for me, and I didn't follow my own advice. I didn't wait long enough after the ink, long enough for the ink to dry, and once I start filling it in with Copics, well, you'll see what happens. It is not going to be pretty. Everything gets smeared, but I do end up fixing it eventually, just kind of going over it and over it and over it again and again with different colors to try to mitigate the impact of what I messed up on. Also, I used the wrong color yellow. See that? That's gold. I meant to get the Y00. I was not paying attention. So now I grab the Y00 and you can see ink going everywhere. This is not pretty. It's not pretty. Oh, by the way, I forgot to erase the pencil graphite, so that was getting smudged everywhere too. Anyways, going over with a black color pencil, and for some reason I draw that sketch there for no reason at all, because I'm about to color over it. You won't even be able to see it. Yeah, honestly, I'd already spent so much time on this drawing. At this point, I just wanted to get it over with, and I was throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this stupid little symbol so I can get out of there and go home. So you can see at the end, it doesn't look too bad. Not as bad as it did in the beginning. Okay, so moving on. Let's go ahead, and this is going to be the final step. So we're in the final stretch here. All I'm going to do is just add some battle damage to his body. Just some scratches on his hand. I did add some extra detail to his wrist and to his thumb as well. But for the most part, we're just going to be just drawing some scratches here. Nothing fancy. And that's it. So if you guys actually made it this far, you are a beast. I don't know how else to say it. This is a very long and drawn out process. If you didn't actually follow along to the drawing, I hope you enjoyed the process anyways. We're able to take some lessons home with you. Most of my drawings are not going to be this difficult, so 90% of them are not, but I do these now that I'm starting to use the square to start the drawing. I kind of feel like I'm cheating, so I kind of feel like I have to up my game and draw the hardest possible screenshot that I can. So there is my reasoning for that. Alright guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.